from Bohemian Grove, and I don't even begin to try and explain all of that now. I would suggest use your favourite internet search engine and just go nuts. But the picture itself, I think, was taken in 1925 or 1926. And as soon as I saw the picture, I love it, because it's like so many of those old hunting shots that you see, and that there's all these guys sort of standing there looking like they should be holding their rifles over a deer carcass or something. But instead, they're holding this pose over some kind of weird rite where this person's sprawled on the grass with candles around them. And it just, it summed up the sort of esoteric ends of this particular idea without being overly explicit. It shows the people who are, I guess, are being portrayed in this release, whether rightly or wrongly, and it gives a slight hint into the various aspersions, you know, that are made in respect of Bohemian Grove, tied into the text which is on the tape label itself,
which is hard to read, but yeah.
What it is it's taken from. There was a particular gentleman by the name of Larry King, who was certainly convicted of various frauds, had a civil action taken against him by one of the children he was said to have abused, didn't participate in that proceeding, so as a result got a judgment against him, and the text which is excerpted on this tape, on the label, is from the judge's judgment. It's available if you have a look around, and it's basically spelling out, in terms of the $1 million or whatever it is that he was awarded, it was basically awarded for physical and psychological trauma, and so that's the more explicit end of the imagery. But as you say, it's very difficult to read, and it's presented in such a taken from, you know, from a court judgment. It's almost the polite way of expressing, you know, this absolutely horrendous, violent, traumatic stuff in, you know, an unusual way. The interest there was effectively aspersions that various religious groups will make against the other, and obviously it continues today and will continue, you know, eternally.
People still believe that?
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, it just, how and when the idea came into my head, I'm really not sure, but it was yet another example of a mistruth that will be perpetuated to serve a specific end.
But the audio of it that you had.
Well, the idea of the audio, the first side is the noise piece, and that was the violence behind it, so to speak. The second side was me in the dead of winter, basically with a handheld dictaphone, trying to run down my street to stay warm. But the idea behind it was the aftermath, taking blood libel as fact and escaping. So that's where the second side came from, was after the violence, well, someone loses, so someone gets the fuck out of there. When I went up to Brisbane about 4 or 5 years ago, whenever White House played the What Is Music Festival, because of my work schedule, I couldn't come to Melbourne, couldn't come to Sydney, so I had to fly all the fucking way up to Brisbane just for these shows. And as it turned out, I'm sorry, but White House were awful, but that's another story. So that's where I met Mike for the first time, and I told him I was coming, didn't hear anything back. there were 2 nights of gigs. Went to the first night, he wasn't there. Turned up the second night. My wife saw a woman just at the bar that we were sitting at waiting for the shows who had a cunt bracelet on, and it was Laura from Cunt. And so that's how I met Laura. And she said, oh, Mike's coming today. He wants to meet you, blah, blah, blah. And so she ran around, because I had no idea what Mike looked like, and so she just ran around until she found him and dragged him across to me. So that's the first time I met Mike.
He strikes me as being a bit of a reclusive guy.
Yeah. Well, having had the pleasure of seeing at least the sort of suburb he lives in, it's halfway between Surfers and Brisbane, and okay. So when I went up for this abysmal show in Brisbane over Easter, Mike had been MIA for 2-3 years and had sort of just re-established contact. And I, again, told him about this gig, said you should come along, bring some stuff, I'm sure we'll be able to, do something together. Again, heard nothing, and suddenly someone just comes over and says, oh, Mike Bailey's here, and they were as shocked as I. So I did my awful solo. I don't want to call it a performance, just the awfulness that was that. And then he plugged in and we did sort of 5 minutes towards the end, which was great. It was excellent. And of course my mini disc fucked up. And then we hung out for a bit. Our car battery went flat. Thankfully his dad showed up and gave us a boost. And have you been to Brisbane?
Never.
The one-way streets are insane, and so we had to go maybe like a kilometre or 2, and we ended up like basically circling the entire city for an hour or an hour and a half just to get back to where we were staying. And for whatever reason, we were driving past the hospital at the time, which was so not the right direction. But I get this call from Mike, who's still driving with his dad back to Loganholme, and he's like, "Oh yeah, my parents, you should come down. You've got your equipment. We'll do some recording." And so 2 or 3 days later, whenever we were heading down to Surfers, I basically spent sort of half a day recording in the kitchen of his parents' rental property, while his dad was sort of cleaning it up between tenants. So there are some collaborative recordings that we did. It's he's sort of editing them down and putting them together for something someday somewhere. It wasn't so much an idea as simply doing a few releases and realising that short of giving them away, the best way to get them out into the world was to be trading for other things. And after realising that there were only so many records I